bringing the people behind our food to life.
I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and every summer when I was a kid, we would go blueberry picking out on Sauvie Island or pick blackberries from the backyard. And so every year we made jam. Not tons and tons of it, but enough to have some to eat and give away throughout the year. So I grew up knowing how to do it. And then when I was in my mid-20s, I was living in Philadelphia, and I went blueberry picking with a friend one day, and I came home with 13 pounds of blueberries. And at that point, I thought, well, what do you do with 13 pounds of blueberries? You make jam. So I called my mom, and I got the quick over-the-phone refresher course, and I made my first batch on my own. And I loved it. I just loved everything about it. And so I kept doing it and trying new projects. And then I started my blog as a way to document what I was doing. And from there, it just kind of exploded into a full-blown career. What's nice about hot water bath canning or boiling water bath canning is that it is something that can be done with what you have in your kitchen already. There's not really a lot of specialized equipment that you have to get in order to do it. If you have a stock pot or a pasta pot, anything where it's tall enough to put a rack at the bottom and hold your jars and have a little bit of water over the top and then have some space in the pot for the water to boil, that can be your canning pot. And so it's a very low sort of barrier to entry, which I always really liked. You can do anything in a boiling water bath that is a high acid product. And when I say high acid, I'm using pH to determine what is high and what is low. So if something has a pH of 4.6 or below, it's considered high in acid. And if it has a pH of 4.7 or above, it's considered low in acid. And so many of the fruits that we sort of normally come into contact with in life are high in acid. So peaches and strawberries and blueberries and blackberries, they're all things that have a lot of acid in them. And so you can make all sorts of different things with those fruits. Additionally, any sort of pickle, as long as it's being made with a vinegar that it starts out with 5% acidity, can make a shelf-stable pickle. It can be something that can be preserved in a boiling water bath. And so all of these high acid foods can be preserved. And I personally love the empowering feeling you get when half of what you're using in your pantry is things you made yourself. So sugar does several things in canning. Sugar, it obviously acts as a sweetener. It is a preservative because sugar, what it does is it occupies the water in the product. So it kind of soaks it all up and makes it so that there's no water available to bacteria for it to grow. Additionally, it also acts as a thickener. So in lots of jams, you're using your sugar to act as what's going to make the product gel, because what happens when you heat sugar is that it changes physical consistency. So when you make candy, you heat sugar to one temperature for like a caramel sauce, or a much higher temperature for hard cracked candies. And so when you make jam, you're using that same ability of sugar to change its physical consistency as it heats in order to thicken it. And then what happens is, as it thickens, it bonds with the pectin that's already in the fruit, because pectin is the fiber that holds up the cell walls of fruits and vegetables. So all produce has it. And so the sugar bonds with the pectin, and that's how you get really thick spreadable jams, is the sort of interplay between the sugar and the pectin. And so often, if you take a recipe, often people will look at a recipe and think, oh, this has far too much sugar in it, I'm going to cut the sugar way back. What ends up happening is that they don't make jam, they make sauce, because there's not enough sugar to create this reaction and make that thick spreadable preserve. Sugar doesn't take the place of acid. You still need a certain amount of acid for the product to be safe, because what the acid is doing is it's preventing botulism growth. So the sugar, high concentrations of sugar, are preventing bacterial growth, but you still need the acid concentration, because when we talk about botulism and canning, what we're really talking about is the botulism spores, which exist in the soil. And they are very hardy and take temperatures of about 240 degrees or more to be killed. And so those botulism spores are never killed at the boiling water, at the boiling point. And so in order to inhibit their ability to develop into the toxin, you have to ensure that there's enough acid in the jar to kind of act as an inhibitor for them. I always knew that I wanted to write a cookbook. Years before I started the blog even, I had this feeling of wanting to write a cookbook. And so I started pitching publishing houses when the blog was only about 6 months old. And I look back at that and I think, what sort of guts, what, chutzpah to go out and start asking people to let me write a book when I'd only been writing on a topic for about 6 months. But I had some history as a food writer before that, and within, I guess it was about a year to the date that I started the blog, I was talking to the woman who became my editor. I like the small batches because they do several things. One, they take less time, so your initial investment of sort of energy is reduced. Two, they allow you to experiment more because your commitment to a product has been reduced. Because if you're doing something in a small batch and you decide you don't like it, you only have 2 or 3 half-pint jars of it. So you can say, you know what, this one just didn't work out, and you either give it away or you pour it into the compost. You don't have to feel like, oh my God, I spent all day doing this and now I don't like it. I also look at it, the small batches, as waste prevention techniques, because in my new book, Preserving by the Pint, every recipe starts with either a pint, a quart, or a pound or 2 of produce. If you went to the farmer's market over the weekend and your eyes were bigger than your meal plan, you can grab some of what you bought at the farmer's market and make a batch of pesto, make a little batch of pickles, make a little batch of jam. And instead of sort of getting to the end of the week and going, oh God, I didn't get to all this produce, you can save it. You don't have to end up sort of consigning it to, the garbage disposal or the trash can or the compost pile. And so for me, that feels really useful. I've been doing this actively, I guess, for about 7 or 8 years now, and the amount of people who are interested in home canning has just exploded. And I think that there are a number of factors that are coming into play that are making that happen. I think one, in 2008, when the economy tanked, people started becoming more concerned about, there was some added food insecurity. And so people wanted to ensure that they were going to have food, and canning was one way to do it. There was also the rise of the organic movement. And so people want to know what chemicals are in their food. And often if you're buying grocery store preserves, you don't know if it's organic or not, or if it is, you're paying a heck of a lot more. And then the other thing that happened is that people were very concerned about BPA, which is the chemical lining in many tin cans. And so people were moving away from commercially canned foods, looking for an alternative because they didn't want that chemical in their foods. And so home canning was another option. And then there's also been the rise of the CSA and the farmers market movement, and people are gardening more. And so all of these things have kind of come together to create a moment for home food preservation. And I hope that it, continues indefinitely, because I think it's such a useful skill to have as a person. And whether you are canning just one thing a year or you're doing your whole pantry, both are valid approaches and useful throughout your life.